For our next technique, we're looking at the process of stenciling. In the past, we did our scumblings, we've done our stipplings, we've done flogging, we've done our dry brush. We've just finished with our stamping example. When we're looking at something like approaching something like a wallpaper, then often we will go with the process of using a stamp or a stencil. What this is I've created a little fleur-de-lis pattern on the computer, printed it out on my Bristol board, and then cut it out with a X-Acto knife. I've used this a few times. So what I would like you to do is to first start off with something that would fit within the area, create a little shape. It could be a heart, it could be a flower, or you could go as elaborate as you can do initials or a number. You can sometimes buy stencils as well. Here's a little sheet of various letters that we use sometimes, but this is on a plastic sheet. But what we usually do when we use stencils on a set is for the purpose of wallpaper. I'm sure there's a number of other reasons, but in my experience, the reason I use a stencil is for wallpaper. We typically will do some sort of a grid on the stage, on the flat, or on the background, or on whatever material we're adding a wallpaper to. And that allows us to have justification lines to align our paper so that it actually does have a pattern. Where we're trying to avoid patterns with every other technique, this one we often want a pattern. But application with this is a couple different ways. We can use put our stencil in line with whatever our justification marks are, and usually we will have some sort of a bucket of paint, pre-made paint, and we have a couple different ways we can apply it. The easiest way to apply it, or probably the most common way, is to take a damp brush, dip it into our bucket of paint, and do that same stippling motion that we did in our earlier example. So I'm going to take this burnt umber that I'm using, and I'm going to dab straight down. I don't want to go at angles. I want to go straight down with this, cover my entire piece here. So I take the time all the way around. I've kind of gone our way. And when I carefully lift my stencil up, I have a nice example of sort of a soft wallpaper. Now, one of the keys to this, remember, just like we've done everything, we put down a base coat. This is our scumble. I did a scumble earlier, kind of a harsh, almost dry brushy type of scumble. We can almost see all the different feathering between the brush or the brush strokes. And then putting this on top allows for a nice, interesting look of color. It's all the same values where we have our burnt umber with this yellow ochre, and then I'm using a straight burnt umber on top for my little fleur-de-lis here. All right, so let's try a different technique. Same thing. We're going to put our little fleur-de-lis down here, and I can take a sponge. Right, so if I use a sponge, and I'm going to dip it in some of my blue here, I can do the same thing with the sponge that I was doing with the brush. So I'm just sponging it on this time. And I'm going to get a very similar look. It just is a different applicator. That's all it is. See, that went pretty fast. So again, I just used a corner of a natural sponge. And as I peel this off carefully, you can see it's very similar. I've got a little bit of overage there, but that's okay. You could also use this technique, much like we did with the stamping, to create foliage. So if you wanted to create, just like we did with this fleur-de-lis, we could actually do a leaf pattern. And by varying where we put it, we could stamp, or we could stencil a leaf pattern on. Typically, if we're doing a very large backdrop with that requires lots of leaves, the stamping method is more effective and definitely time effective. But you can see they're very similar. So whether you use a paintbrush or whether you use a sponge, it really doesn't matter. You will sometimes get, if you want more of a texture, you may want to use the sponge and use a different type of your paint, play around with the viscosity of it, how thick, how thin you have, and you might get a little different variety. But overall, if we're doing wallpaper, we want sort of a soft look anyway. I find that the sponge is the easiest way to apply it. It goes very quickly. You may find certain wallpapers have many layers. You may have several different layers where each layer is a different color. So if we're doing a very fine wallpaper with, like, say, a vase, flowers, leaves, the vase may be a single stamp, or I'm sorry, a single stencil that maybe you do a pink color. Then the leaves would go over with a green color, and then the flowers would go over, maybe it might be reds or blues. And so you end up using multiple stencils just for one area. All right, so for this exercise, I want you to take a piece of your Bristol board, create a very simple stencil, cut it out. You see the negative space is what leaves actually the color. And then apply it. Try applying one with either a sponge. You could even use a kitchen sponge like we were using earlier. And also create one using just a straight one of these little cheap brushes we had, and try the stippling method on top. Okay, so that's it for this one. And we'll see you on the next one.